Guys, you just have to hang on a second because everything's gone horribly blue. And if you just, she's all Gabby's fault for insisting that we have an extra slide at the beginning, which is generally messing things up. So I'm going to delete that. Sorry, Gabby. Just for the moment.
Just go back, and just then, undo all changes.
Yeah. And
undoing the delete, but if you undo the previous changes as well.
I'm trying to go back to fun. There we are, lovely white background. Okay, folks, right, we have success. Help me save that. Let me just give you a couple of words of introduction before we get going. So when Gabby asked me to do the seminar, he said, think of it as an MA seminar. Now, some of you know I'm quite an interactive teacher, but given that we have a whole other audience who aren't here to participate, I'm going to do some interactivity in another way. I want us to be used today at several levels. I want to introduce you, if you don't know it already, to the sort of standard online resource for accessing cuneiform texts. And I want to go behind the scenes with that to show you how it works. So the interactivity bit will be me attempting to edit live in front of you, and we'll go from a photograph of a cuneiform tablet to something that's actually sitting in the online corpus for people to use. And this is genuinely a text that I haven't yet edited, right? So it will be a genuine real live demonstration. But I also want us to be using this as a case study for thinking about using online editions. And I know that very few of us in the room are cuneiform literate, so that's not a prerequisite. It's not about training you to put stuff on the cuneiform repository. It's not even necessarily about helping you think about creating your own repository of ancient text. But think, as I go through showing you what Auric can and can't do and how the editing process works, it might help you think about the ways in which you use text edition, whether that's in books or online, when you're translating or editing text for your own research. What are the tools available and what are they good for, right? So we can have, I hope we can open out the discussion at the end to think about these questions more generally and kind of share some ideas. So yeah, so they will not be a test, really. I'm just joking. So it's just the way. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about, very briefly about cuneiform text and cuneiform culture, then about what Auric does, and then we'll move on the second half to this experiment in live edition. I know most of you are ancient historians here, but you may not be hugely familiar with the cuneiform world of the ancient Middle East. So from about the late 4th millennium BC to at least the 1st century AD, shrinking numbers of people, but for a large part of ancient history, a large number of people were writing on objects like this, minus the actual keyring. Clay, freely available, and you'll see the writing is impressed in the surface of the clay. And that means that they are intrinsically archaeological artifacts. Everything that we work with today has come out of the ground, either through formal modern excavation or through pre-archaeological Victorian digs, or unfortunately through more recent looting, though some of us don't work on the looted stuff, and you'll see why in a minute. So we've got then a rather different situation to the classical ancient world, in that our texts are a new antiquity. They haven't always been around, right? So people haven't always known how to read them. There hasn't been a continuous tradition of reading, and therefore there hasn't been a continuous tradition of producing tools to read and edit, right? So that's all new. That begins in the late 1840s and is still an ongoing process, right? The basic dictionary tools are now more or less finished, but that's an incredibly recent phenomenon. So one of the reasons that we edit online is basic primary edition, first exposure in the modern world to ancient stuff. And then we've always got the materiality of the text in the background too. Then there's another further complication. Most of you working on ancient texts are working in alphabetic cultures. Cuneiform is a whole, we use one word, but in fact it's a whole family of script practices. Wedge-shaped writing, you can see on the little key ring impressions on the surface. The whole repertoire of cuneiform signs runs into the low thousands, but people could quite comfortably use a few dozen. The more literate and scholarly would comfortably use up to 500. And a bit like ancient Egyptian or modern Japanese or Chinese, there are several functions that signs can take. And a single sign can take different functions depending on context. So there's always that contextual reading one has to do. So a sign can stand for a whole word, an ideogram or a logogram, can stand for a syllable, a set of sounds. It can be not meant to be read, but more like punctuation or a hint about what's coming next. So like it's in hieroglyphic Egyptian, you can have what are called determinatives to say, hey, the next word is a place name, or the next word is a type of fish. Right? So they're normally associated with nouns. And then, of course, there are number signs and weights and measure signs as well. So cuneiform is just a script. It's not a language. So just like the modern Western alphabet or the modern Arabic alphabet, it can be used to write lots of different languages. So Indo-European languages like Hittite, Semitic languages like Akkadian, which splits up into Northern Assyrian and Southern Babylonian, which is related to Hebrew and Arabic and other Semitic languages. And then there are lots of languages that presumably had linguistic relatives in antiquity, but they were never written down and they don't survive. So for our purposes, then we have lots of linguistic isolates. So Elamite from Iran, for instance, Hurrian and Iratian, Kassite. There's a whole variety of languages that aren't terribly well attested and that we can only really read when we have bilinguals with others. So Sumerian and Akkadian are our two major languages. So Akkadian is the most accessible to us below that complex cuneiform script. Once we transliterate it into the alphabet, and you'll see that that's an intrinsic part of our editing process, then we can treat it really just like Hebrew or Arabic or another Semitic language. And there are lots of cognates, and the sentence structure and the morphology of the words are very, very similar. And then the isolate languages like Sumerian or Hurrian, we can only really access through Akkadian translations. We only really know what a word means if someone in deep antiquity has told us what it means. We really can't guess. So, the open, richly annotated cuneiform corpus is a collective endeavour, a cooperative really, to try and pull together all of this incredibly rich and diverse material that basically has in common that is written in the cuneiform script from the ancient Middle East, from just before 5,000 years ago to just after 2,000 years ago. Very conservative estimates, that is about 500,000 objects. That's a lot of stuff in this in a complicated script and many different languages. Because it's a cooperative, it's really based on people coming and volunteering stuff. So at the smallest scale, it's graduate students with their little dissertation projects, editing texts as part of their coursework. At the largest scale, there are huge international projects producing their standard editions of text like royal inscriptions or state archives that are basically the discipline standard. And originally when Auric was created, or its predecessor was created 10 years ago, what we were doing was taking legacy, so word processed files that had been used to create the books in the 80s and 90s and put them online. But now what's happening is that the standard editions are going Auric first, and then the print publications are spin-off from the online edition. And then there are sort of these mid-range projects. So there's the tiny, and then there's the huge sort of research council funded stuff. And then there are the mid-range projects, which typically bring together material that has been scattered in different little publications, and people are editing consistently based on their own interests. So if we flip out of this and look at Auric's project list, which at the moment, yeah, it needs refining, because now originally there were about 5 or 6 projects on Auric, and now it's massive. So the list is incredibly long, and it's alphabetical. And so Auric does 2 things. As well as text edition, it also does sort of background educational projects as well. So not all of everything that you see here is text edition, but we have, yeah, the addition of a text or a rather ugly statue that you can go and look at the British Museum. We have, this is a mid-range project that's interested in Sumerian Akkadian bilingual scholarship, that pulls together lots of stuff that's been edited in different things. There's various, then we have sort of overarching projects on ancient Mesopotamia scholarship and this is an interesting mix of stuff that has been previously edited and is freshly edited or was pulled together for the first time. Then the big projects are down here under the R and S. Royal inscriptions of Assyria, royal inscriptions of Babylonia. And so they typically, some of them like to list their sub-projects. So Auric, the team, including me, that runs Auric, we can't have a big strategic overview of what Auric should contain, except that eventually Auric should contain everything, and we are encouraging people to do it. But Auric itself has no funding, so what we do is facilitate projects to get funding and to provide them support to do that. So at the moment, the emphasis is very much on the first millennium BC. That's where the big interest of people, historians who are interested in the big empires of Assyria and Babylonia have, and where their own text corpora are large and difficult to access, they found Auric very useful. And then at the other end of the chronological scale, there's the electronic text corpus of Sumerian wall inscriptions that starts from the beginning and goes right through the 3rd millennium. But there are lots of things we don't yet have. Right? And you can also see from this list that the projects are still very, very siloed. And one of the problems that one of the next big things to tackle is how to integrate these things. Because we've always had to, as well as all the sort of the computational engineering to make this work, there's a lot of social engineering, because everyone comes with their own ideas of what good edition looks like and how to appropriately transliterate and translate text. And everyone has slightly different ways, and we can only to some extent impose quite basic standards, and we can't police every single text that gets edited either, and we really don't want to be getting into fights about diacritics. So that overarching standardization issue and interoperability issue is one we're going to have to face kind of soon. And those of you who were here a couple of weeks ago heard Greg Crane talking. On one of our next big missions is to work with him about not just about interactivity within Auric, but also within the outside world. The other big thing that we need to do is that really our code is pre-mobile, and so accessibility. All my students turn up to class now with little phones, and they're trying to read Auric on tiny screens, and so we need to fix that too. But basically, that's what we've got. So they're working very, very well within projects. But if you just, as an outsider, want to go in and say, find me all the texts with frogs in, you can't do that yet. Well, you can, but there's a very clumsy way to do that. So we need to start thinking about that. So that's one of the drawbacks. But once you're inside a single project, then what you've got is incredibly consistently produced edition. What you don't have, which the standard text editions do, is very much explanatory commentary, justification of editorial decisions, historical commentary on the meanings of the text, etc. And that's been a deliberate choice, partly to encourage the big projects to use us without scaring away publishers. And that was very important in the early days. There had to be a value added to books, right? And if we provided everything that books did, then the big projects funding models were kind of would be in jeopardy. And we're hoping that we can kind of roll back from that a bit as people are relaxing into the idea of online edition. So, as a user, as someone who is either cuneiform literate or not cuneiform literate, like one of my first year undergraduates, so I teach in a history department, most of my students are just general purpose historians. But I use Auric a lot for teaching because we can, in Auric, read text either in modern translation or in the alphabetic transliteration of the ancient text, or the both side by side, or we can access black and white drawings or photographs from something that's just, I have obviously forgotten to finish that line, CDLI, the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, which runs out of UCLA, and which is whereas Auric is the standard text edition and historical contextualization, CDLI is basically a database of the objects on which the texts are, and it has comprehensive catalogues. It's been going museum by museum, doing cataloguing and photographing, and so we work with them. They're kind of our image servers. And I'll also show you in a minute, you can go into Auric, and then within a project, at least, it's very efficient to either, if you're cuneiform literate, you can search for particular spellings of words. If you're not interested in the spellings of words or you don't care about that, all the texts, or almost all the texts now, each word is linked to glossaries so that you can just search for words in ancient languages or modern languages. And thinking back to last week, proper nouns are tagged as well and categorized. So you can search for personal names, for ancestral names, for city names, for temple names, for watercourse names, for royal names, for all sorts of things that some of which are kind of very specific to the cuneiform world, perhaps. And there's also a lot of documentation on the Auric website for how to use this, but also how to create Auric content for yourself. And importantly, how to take bits of Auric and reuse them. And I find that really, really very helpful for me in my teaching. I want to put together bespoke lumps of groups of text from across the corpora. I've been running a special subject course called Temple Life in Assyria and Babylonia this academic year. And that's pulled in material from legal documents on here, royal inscriptions on here, temple administrative records, a whole variety of different genres that exist in perhaps 10 different projects on Auric. And there is the facility at text level to create lists, very easily to create lists of projects. So let me show you what I mean. Let's choose, should we have some anti-witchcraft rituals? Why not? Always useful, aren't they? I'm just pulling this at random. This is genuinely live, right? So what we call the corpus is the text edition, and then the portal is the chatty stuff about it. So let's go into the corpus. All right, what do we have? Shall we have? So this is all preparation for a book, for a very techie academic book. So it's again this is a German project, although they're translating into English. So that there aren't many much help given people who don't really understand what they're looking at, I'm afraid. So let's, I don't know what let's do. So that's your standard view. You've got on the far side the metadata. You've got text, ancient text in alphabetic representation on one side. You've got the translation on the other, and because I've obviously got slightly too big a thing there, you can see that. And you can, if you really don't like the look of the Akkadian, you can hide it, or you can, yeah, that's not working. Always, isn't it? It doesn't work. So you can hide the, oh yeah, we are. So you can hide the English, right? So depending on what you want to do, that's quite useful. All these blue words, not surprisingly, are clickable into the glossary. So let's pick a word, kishpu, which means witchcraft, sorcery, right? So here, linking to the glossary, it's not giving, It's giving us all the different spellings, all the different forms the word can take when we resolve the spellings. So we have two different alphabetic representations. What we call transliterations, which enable a cuneiform literate person to see which cuneiform signs we use to write the word. And then we have what's called a normalization, which says, forget about the cuneiform, what's going on with the actual grammatical shape, the morphology of the word. And like many pre-modern languages, there are lots and lots of different ways to spell the same word quite often, right? Just as Shakespeare could spell his name in many different ways. So, and then it says there are 390 attestations of the word witchcraft in this corpus. That's not surprising because the whole corpus is about witchcraft. So you can click on that and see all of them, or you can choose a particular morphology of the word, or you can choose a particular spelling, and then you get back into the instances. Right. Now this corpus is interesting because it does two different things. It edits single manuscripts, so single physical objects. Things like anti-witchcraft rituals circulate in many manuscripts, many of which are fragmentary, and so that the editors also produce a composite text based on all the different witnesses. Right? So, and when they're doing on the main page of a text edition, rather controversially, it's not my personal preference, they move between this normalization, which is agnostic as the cuneiform, where they've got more than one witness, and then they show the cuneiform transliteration where they've only got one witness. And you can click on the line number there and you can see the witnesses to that line, right? So Auric does all of this stuff, right? So for producing highfalutin, very techy text editions that only 5 anti-witchcraft ritual experts in the world will ever read, this is fantastic, right? But you can always, as said, use it at the other end. You can hide all that techie stuff, just look at the translations and work with your students or yourself, right? If you're just interested in the history of witchcraft, you don't have to engage with the text at all. You can also, so you can reset everything with the reset button. You can go into the hub, and let's pull this over because I didn't do a very good job of making this. And you will see that you can access lots of glossaries. There's Akkadian and Sumerian, proper nouns in general, but then the proper nouns split up into star and constellation names, gods' names, ethnic names, blah, 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 whatever's in the corpus, right? So lots of different ways. So let's have a look. Temples, why not? See which temples. There are only 3. That makes it nice and easy. Right, so Esangilo is the temple in Babylon. And then we can see if we're interested. My undergraduate, my ladies writing their final year dissertations on temples might be interested in the use of where anti-witchcraft rituals happen in this particular temple. They can call up all the witnesses there, right? And then they can click on that to get the whole back into the whole text and look at the translation. So that's probably enough about what Auric can do from there. If you ever, and then of course the question mark button pulls up the help. So you get nice chatty stuff about using the glossaries, how to cite the URLs, how to reuse bits of Auric, using a cuneiform font's not necessary, but there are bits of the corpus in which you can turn the transliteration back into cuneiform, and if you want to do that, you need a special font. And then there's, stuff on how to search and all sorts of things like that. So that's what Auric looks like. So I've said a little bit about its principles already, and I explained why it's called Auric. So there are two answers to that. One is it's a geeky callback to the little handheld computer in Blake 7 from the, so those of us of a certain age will know what we mean. But it stands for, and this is a slightly reverse engineered thing to make it Auric, open. So that means open in several senses. So we work for free. We work for love. We work in a very cooperative, collaborative manner that aims to be responsive to content creators' needs, but trying to keep the sort of the community ideals and the wider user community in mind as well. All of our data and tools are free to access, free to create, and free to reuse. Some of this needs quite careful negotiating with particular projects, particularly if they're coming on board after having had publishing contracts with particularly old-fashioned academic publishers who are nervous about open access. So some of the licenses are a bit more restricted, but they always say, if you talk to us and we can negotiate. So that's the open stuff. It's richly annotated, and that means the linguistic annotation that you've seen. I've shown you what we call the lemmatization for linking individual words to dictionary entries, but we can also mark up for syntax, that is word order within sentences, and morphology, the shapes, the meaningful grammatical shapes of particular words, particularly nouns and adjectives, adverbs and verbs are the things that really matter. There are analysing tools for number systems and weights and measures, which is as complicated, if not more so, as the sort of pre-modern English system or the imperial system. Analysing orthography, which is still in development, that's something I'm particularly interested in. Why do people spell in particular ways in particular contexts? And then at the Californian end, social network analysis and sort of group work, and that's particularly important for the administrative and legal documents. Our only requirement is that on the object that you're editing, there is at least a bit of cuneiform, but there are bilingual texts in our corpus as well. So the guys at Johns Hopkins at the moment who are editing the Amala letters, which is about to go live at the end of the summer, they have ancient Egyptian, and there are Syrian texts with Aramaic alphabetic script, there are Hellenistic documents with Greek, there are Old Persian texts which are in a much simpler version of cuneiform. Auric handles all of these. So it's all very well looking at that. I want to now go under the bonnet and show you what happens. So I'm going to give you a quick overview now, and then we're going to do it, right? And as I said, this is a real life experiment. So obviously, we need to have some metadata. What is this? Where is it from? Originally under the ground. Where is it now? Where has it been in the meantime? Need to describe what sort of text is on the object. We also want to say something about its edition history. So where the cuneiform copies were first published, who's edited it, who's translated it, who's commented on it, all of that stuff. Those basically 4 different types of metadata all get fed into Auric in as much or as little detail as a project wants to do, but we have some minimum standards that we expect. Then the minimum for actually putting stuff up online is to transliterate, turn the cuneiform into alphabetic representations of the script. And we have, you'll see in a second, a simple coding system, which is called ATF, which stands for ASCII transliteration format, which is now a misnomer because we've been using Unicode since 2007, but ATF is stuck. And thanks to 2 people in the audience here, Raquel and Jens, we now have our own editor, and you'll see that the most recent edition, which is all of 24 hours old, gets its first public outing here. And we also have a little keyboard switcher, both for Macs and PCs, so that it's easy to write the diacritics that we need. So once you've transliterated, if you're just word processing, you have to then proofread by hand. But Auric has an inbuilt proofreader, right? It checks the validity of what you've typed, both in terms of the ATF, is it valid code, but also is it a recognized reading of a cuneiform sign, right? And it will tell you off if you write nonsense. It won't tell you if your transliteration is true and accurate, but it will tell you if it's valid. So once you've done that, you then need to translate it. And an easy way to translate it is to associate each word with the dictionary entry. Now that's lemmatizing. Now, Auric is great at this. Auric knows an awful lot about how spellings map to dictionary headwords. And of course, those spelling traditions vary across genre, across time, and across place. And so each project is quite, in Auric, is quite specific. So if you're starting up from scratch, you can say, I want to borrow the glossary of the Neo-Assyrian period, because my texts are from that period. Or I want to borrow the posh Babylonian, the so-called standard Babylonian literary dialect. Or I want to borrow Old Assyrian, right? And so you can get it, and then you can teach it new stuff. And this is great, because sometimes you can identify what the signs are and you can't quite make it into words, and Auric can do that for you. It's really handy. So there have been a couple of times where it's given me keywords and I'm like, oh yeah, now I know what this text is about. And you can teach it new stuff too, right? So you're not constrained by what it already knows. You can constantly feed back into it. And if the assumption it's made about your text is wrong, you can just correct it. You don't have to teach it completely from scratch. And then you build all of that stuff, the cataloguing, the lemmatization, the transliteration, the translation into the corpus. Right. That's what we're going to try and do now. That's my mission. So we're going to start with a text that was still in the ground in February. So this is a new use of Auric, the stuff that is born, well, not born digital, it's born mud, right? But it goes straight from the ground to the cloud, and there is no print version in intermediate. So I work on a project in southern Iraq, near the big city of Nasiriyah. It's about an hour's drive north from Basra on the so that's where we fly into. We live at the big ancient city of Ur, but the site itself is a teeny tiny one about 20 kilometers away. We don't really do large-scale excavations in Iraq. That's massively expensive and impossible. The sites are just, Ur is just impossibly huge. There's a little site that was chosen about 4 years ago because it's basically a small mound with a big building on it, and perhaps you can see the outline of the big building on it there. Now, the excavators picked it because a pottery survey of the surface back in the 1970s had revealed pottery that was diagnostic of the transition into literacy, and that's what the excavators were really interested in. Like, where does history begin and how does it begin? And that's a period we don't know very much about at all. Unluckily for them and luckily for me, yes, most of the mound is that, but the big building where they started that you can see on here is a much later one that was dumped on top of the abandoned old town, right? And it has produced tablets from a fully literate period entirely unexpectedly. To cut a long story short, it's basically a big agricultural warehouse belonging to a palace, but in the middle of the countryside, 20 kilometers from the city. And it's somewhere where, yeah, you might expect to find some basic agricultural administration, but it's also producing other very interesting types of literacy too. But that's not the topic for today. We're going to do one of the boring admin documents today. So the building itself is really close to the surface. So this is a photograph from just after a couple of days, a couple of weeks into the project. They just scrape the surface. These great big fancy buttresses are revealed, and then they started, bless them. The first room they chose to dig had this little round thing in it, perhaps you can see. That's a tablet recycling bin, and that was the archive room. They just had this amazing instinct to go for the tablet, which was not what they wanted, not what they expected. So that was bizarre. And it was also bizarre that I happened to be in Iraq doing something entirely other at the time. They didn't have an epigrapher on the dig because they weren't expecting this. I was always planning to visit just to come and get in the way and see how they were going. And they said, no, we need you. So I ended up by pure happenstance becoming the epigrapher. And that was a few years ago, and we're still going strong, and it's fantastic. So, but all of this stuff is relevant because all of the stuff that they create, the data, the objects they collect and the data that the on-site team collect about the objects all feed into the edition, right? So it's a British-Iraqi excavation. The guy you see here with the blue hood on, I don't know his formal name because everyone calls him Gilgamesh because he's a really good tablet excavator, right? So Gilgamesh was the guy that excavated my first tablet, right? And that's Stuart and Robert there, and you can see Robert has they have these what they call these tough book notebooks. So all the data they collect is going straight onto laptops. It's a paper-free It's a paper-free excavation. And then we work in porter cabins given to us by the British Embassy at Ur. And then, there's much more processing of the objects and of the data. So Dan up here does clay analysis. I'm there just brushing dust off the surface of the clay. But Julia down here does the serious conservation work, and she basically makes the tablets legible. At the back, Adrian is hiding in our photographic darkroom. That's also really important because the tablets stay in Iraq. So I do a quick and dirty first read. Adrian's beautiful photographs that you'll see in a second are what makes the tablets really legible. So what we've got then is, actually it turns out to be two long archive rooms. There's our recycling bin, and then standing above it, that's me in the blue shirt, and next to me in the cream shirt is Belinda Lewis, who's the Deputy British Ambassador in Iraq. So she's a big supporter of ours and various members of our team and some of her heavies. She always gets escorted by 5 white armoured vehicles, as you do. Security down south is actually fine. So we have 150 tablets so far coming out of these 2 long rooms. Ignore the cross walls going up that way. They're later. We now know as of March, because we're finding tablets under the walls, that we've got 2 long rooms. Oh yes, talking of support systems, British as well as the British Embassy, then there's a whole massive Iraqi support system. The local police who hang out on site and they're not needed, but they feel obliged to be there. Abdul Amir Al-Hamdani, who's our boss basically, who's the local director of antiquities, who is excellent. And this is Dave, who is the site manager of Ur and is the direct descendant of one of Leonard Woolley's foremen. The whole family has lived on site. And that's the whole team on a day out for marches. So lots of people involved in the production of text. When Gilgamesh or Mary or Faye finds a tablet and brushes off the surface, it looks like this, right? It's a blooming mess. That's a good one. Up there, that's a bad one down there. Julia the magician, I just can't tell you. I don't know how she does it, but she transforms those heaps of mud into legible objects that have to be stuck together in various reversible ways, but she cleans them up. She's not herself uniform literate. She sits on the desk next to me, and we work together. And she says it's the most satisfying part of her job is doing this. This is why I don't work on illicit antiquities, right? Most stuff that comes out of the ground comes out like this. So anything that is not expertly excavated is destroyed. Perhaps 20% of our tablets come out of the ground robust enough not to need very much of Julia's intervention. Right? So any collection of unprovenance antiquities is maximally, let's say, 20% of what the looters actually found. Never mind all that destruction of vital contextual information, which we'll come on to in a second. So, vital contextual information. Sorry, those lines are very, very faint, but that's the outline of our archive buildings. The circles there are the recycling bins. We've now got 3. We know, because of this fantastic recording, where the tablets are found down to the millimetre. And not only, therefore, do we have this building, but we know precisely the physical relationships between the tablets when they were abandoned. And we've got different genres. So the stuff that we expect, the administrative records, the memoranda, the lists, the accounts are up in the northern end of the archive area, which started coming out right at the beginning. Then last year, much to our surprise, formal schooling exercises, which are only meant to be studied by posh kids in cities, not in agricultural warehouses in the countryside, in our archive room. And they clearly, when you're learning to write, you write very fast from memory. You then screw up your tablets, chuck it back in the recycling bin, start again and reuse. So often you end up ripping them up. And the ancient tears, the clay is still fresh, right? You can see the tears. They're not breaks of dried clay, right? So And they've all been dumped in the corner. They're tiny fragments of this stuff that the detritus from recycling and then has been swept in the corner and forgotten. So that was extraordinary. That was last year. And then this year, all the red and orange stuff that's coming out of the room that hadn't been excavated before is stuff by people who are not professionally literate. In big handwriting, very, very bad spelling, short letters, telling the professionally literate scribes, the guys with the professional title scribes, what to do and what they think about things. So that's all astonishing and exciting. Right, so let's move on. So what am I doing when I'm sitting in the Portakabin at Ur? I'm usually, this year I was editing more or less straight to Auric. Not allowed to take tablets out, so we have one of Adrian's beautiful photographs. This is one I was too hurried to do at the time, and I haven't had time since, so we're going to do it together. I've set up the editor. I haven't quite set up the editor. I need to put TK1, 3064, 120. So this is, let me make this. Oh, Raquel, can I make the text bigger? Is this possible? Yet? No. Okay, so you'll just have to look at the colours. So the colours are Jens's work. They enable us just to distinguish different types of information here, right? And if you mistype Auric code, if you misspell project, for instance, it turns black, shouts at you, right? So the project is the Ur Regional Archaeology Project. The X, we have P numbers, which come, the numbers at the top are the CDLI's catalogue numbers, because these are fresh out of the ground. They're not in the CDLI system yet, so they have X numbers, temporary numbers, and I equate that with the excavation number to make sure that I haven't made a mistake. Then we say that it's an Akkadian. X means we're agnostic as to you can specify particular types of handwriting, but we never bother. And it's in the Old Babylonian dialect. We're telling it to use Unicode. We're telling it to deal with numbers in a particular way, right? And then we say it's a tablet. And then we say it's the obverse of a tablet, it's the front, right? And then we can say the start of the obverse is missing. And then, because we don't have the first line number, we'll do 1 hash. Actually, no, what we do, before that, we want to mark that there is a single ruling. You can see there, I hope at the top there, there's a line. Right, so the first sign is missing, so we're going to put square bracket X. Okay, you're gonna have to trust me on this. Right? If you only see any mistakes, this will all. I'm having a bad spelling day. Right, so this sign that I can just about see at the beginning, which is damaged, so I will put a hash next to it. I know only occurs is the end of a god's name. Okay, we read it Urta, and I'll show you why I know it only occurs in the end of a god's name. So if I go to, this is not on the public site yet, but it's still on there. If I go to your corpus, I use all the time as an editing tool, right? And I tell to search for the logogram Urta. Whoops, type it. And I've got a caps lock on, that doesn't help, does it? There we are. Okay, so it's a Sumerian god Ninurta, right? So it can only occur after the determinative for god, D for divine, and Nin for lord, right? So, and it only occurs in trust me, these are all names, right? So I can see immediately the context in my corpus in which this sign occurs, right? So that it already enables me to say, right, I must write determinative and then there. I must be confident of that, right? I know that sign Dingir there, so I can either just look, what am I looking for? There's that one right at the top. That's a different spelling of the same thing. But I could also say another logogram dingo because I'm failing to find it, and I know it's here somewhere. No. All right. So what I can do, I can also then go to the glossary of people's names, and I can say, okay, I know it's an inertian name. Here are the inertian names I've got. Okay, so again, you have to trust me that Dingir is an alternative spelling for, it means Dingir is a Sumerian sign for God. This also means his God. So it means literally the God Ninurta is his God. That looks like a good thing. And then this word means son of, and we don't have the father's name, so we'll leave that blank. Back to the photograph. And we've got a bit of damage there, which is the sign ear. This is din, another Dingir sign. This is nin. This is Ninurta again here. Oh, that's nin. That's ota. And then we've got missing here. So that's quite nice. So we can say, okay, we've got damaged ear, din, terminative, nin, ota. Missing. Line 3, and then I think that will be enough for us. So we've got ish and t, and another Dingir for God sign, and another Dumu for sun. I'm not quite sure what that sign is. I think I know, but let's pretend I don't. Let's go back to the main thing where we can search for transliterations, and I say, find me ish t. Where does that occur? Again, it only occurs in names. Kishti, and I've got Kishti is gift, so it means gift of a god. Mostly the Amorite god Martu. We've got some that the name doesn't survive. And yeah, so, and then there's one where the sign before it is re. Now I can look at this photograph and say the traces of the end of that sign fit with the sign ki, but they don't fit with the sign re. And given that 12 of our 13 attestations are almost certainly Kishti, then that's almost certainly what we've got. So yeah, actually I said that was Ninurta, but it's not. I was reading, I think I was jumping a line. Can't quite see what that sign is, so I'm going to just call it X for the moment. That's okay too, that's quite common, right? So we can say key number 2 is damaged, ish, T, Dingir, X, and then Dumu. Okay. And then let's just say we have 2 lines of traces of text. I'm going to save that. I'm going to say that's all the text that there is. I'm going to check it. The validation returned no errors. Aha, good me. Right. Let me just mess things up for a second. Let's save that and then run it now, and it should tell me there's no such cuneiform sign. It says, please see the highlighted areas, right? And it says unknown sign name graphing. So isn't that lovely? You can see immediately where the problems are. Right.
If it was unknown, just because it was new, you could still say
and then
it.
You can, yeah, you can. And then what you do is you notify my colleague Nick, and he adds it to the database. So now what we want to do is to connect all these spellings to words that already are in the glossary and then teach it new stuff. So if I limitize, there we are. So it's gone, connected to Philadelphia where the database is. It's recognized that this name is Idin Ninurta. if I have lots of hidden inverters that I can distinguish between them, I can give them each numbers. I'm not doing that at the moment because I'm not confident enough that there are different ones. They're all number 1. PN for personal name. Duma knows it's a logogram for the Akkadian word sun. It knows that when it's almost always in this in what we call the absolute or construct case, that it doesn't have a nominative, genitive, or accusative ending in it before. That's because it'll be before a name. What I want to do is to teach it that this is this X thing. I will say add a plus for add it to the corpus, and we'll say this is nen ota ilum. I'm not going to give him a number. He's a personal name, and I don't need to specify a different morphology because names never change. But if it was just a normal word and I wanted to say this is in the genitive or the accusative case, or this has a possessive suffix on, then I'd type out the context-specific normalization. Right. So when I've done that, I now can do a translation, which we'll do very quickly. It's a translation in English. It belongs to the project, and I'm going to do parallel translation, so just line by line. So I say we're on the obverse, we're on line 1. We've got so this is a trivial translation because it's only personal names. Elon, son of Mr. ... Often I know who Dad is because the name occurs somewhere else, but in this case I don't. Idin Inota, and he's almost certainly son of someone, so but he might be a profession, he might be a baker or a farmer or a weaver. And then actually here, it's quite useful to put in damage names too. So I'm going to say that this is Mr. Kishi X. Son of da. Right. So, right, I've saved that. I can check again, make sure I haven't made any silly mistakes. And I have, because that should be parallel project. I always get that wrong. Specify a particular order. Okay. Still doesn't like it. What do I do? Parallel end project. Yes, right. So even me, I've been editing in Auric for 9 years, and I still make mistakes, right? So this instant correction is enormously helpful. Right, so now I'm going to upload it to Philadelphia. I'm going to connect via cyberduck because that's the quick way. And then we're nearly done. So I need to physically put the file on the server in Philadelphia. So we are going to connect to and we're going to connect to the Auric project. It knows I don't right there, it knows my password. Okay. And we need to put it in the ATF file. And you can see there's loads of stuff there already. Where did I put it? Oh no, actually I did. I saved it to where it ought to be. Hang on a second. I was good. See, this is my real stuff. This isn't me pretending, right? ATF 2016, and it's with 120. Right. Before I put it online, let me show you, if it's reset, that we haven't actually got a text yet of that number in the corpus. Right. It is at the moment saying that metadata's there already. I haven't bothered you with the metadata, but it says right now, notice edition presently available. Nothing up my sleeve, in other words. So here comes cyberduck again. I'm just going to drag and drop here. And that's going to upload. Meanwhile, I'll call up the terminal and connect to the server with the terminal. Session to Auric you. And amazing, I haven't missed out my classwork. To tell it to, I'm going to make this text bigger. Tell it just to check everything's okay. It's really boring. For both responses and what it's doing. And it will in a second hopefully tell me if it's okay. There's no point in me going, okay. So what it's picking up are problems, problems I know about already, which are to do with the Sumerian, which we really don't care about. So we're working entirely on Akkadian. You can treat the languages separately. So you can say, I can't be bothered to fix this stuff right now. So we can put that to one side. And then we can ask it to harvest all the new words, right? Find all the new stuff in order to put it in the glossary. And that's really useful. You don't need the processor doesn't need to do that, but what that does for a project manager is collect all the new words and enable you to check that you or your editors haven't made any silly mistakes, right? So it says, okay, it thinks it's waiting for a review for 2 new words to go into the Old Babylonian glossary, those 11 problematic ones that it already flagged, the Sumerian, which we're going to ignore, 3 new entries for the proper nouns thing, right? So what I can do is, the quick way to do this is let's just have a look at the problem. We know to have a look at the things it thinks it wants to add to the new proper noun glossary. Okay, so there's a Sumerian problem there. What's our new stuff not showing? What's going on? Ah, right, that's interesting. That is on there. Let's just always the way, isn't it? So let me just build the corpus and see if it. No, let me just. It knows the text is there, I think. Warning and notices. Has it stopped? Does it say if it's stopped? In the right place. Yeah. Okay. Let me see. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the text to the corpus without incorporating the glossary information. And if that works, then we'll go back and deal with the glossary. Takes a little while because it's compiling everything. But it lets you know it hasn't hung. It's every 10 seconds it tells you, hang on, I'm still doing stuff, right? It's quite useful. You don't have to be connected while it's doing this. You can disconnect and go and do other stuff. There we are. Okay, it's happy. Ignore that stuff that says no such file or directory. It always says that. That's stuff that Steve's just forgotten to do. And if we go back, so 4, 120, let's fingers crossed. Yes, perfect. Right, hey. So partial success. Hasn't taken the transliteration, which suggests that that's probably what the problem is there. But I think Raquel and I had picked up earlier this week there were problems at the moment with processing translations. So I think looking at the time, that is probably plenty. It's good enough, right? It's good enough. And I know. Look, because it's not. I didn't save that. That's why. It's that misspelling. See, I didn't save the correct spelling. It's got Dumu instead of Dumu there. Yeah. So I can go away if that's my fault, right? That's my fault. So let me finish off then. 2 last slides. That. So yeah. So I've been kind of doing this double editing. I've really been talking about Auric. We talked about the stuff that we need to do to make Auric more user-friendly and more accessible to the outside world. The stuff that Raquel and Jens have been doing and been making it enormously more accessible for content creators. And then for me as a text editor, then Auric's going to be enormously useful for me as I continue to work on the text from Tal Haber, which are still coming out of the ground. We reckon we haven't quite finished excavating that bit of the building. There are perhaps 40 more pieces of clay to come out of the ground. And great as the photos are, because the surfaces of cuneiform tablets are not always flat, and because photographers are never cuneiform literate, they always manage to get slightly out of focus the key sign on the edge of the tablet. So I'm on leave this coming academic year, and I'll be hopefully spending a month or so in Baghdad with all this stuff, particularly the stuff that came out of the ground in the first couple of seasons when we weren't quite sure what it was yet. Just to have a look at that and look at it with a much more confident eye. And then working with all of that data on the physical spatial relationships between the tablets and what their relationships are, and all of this online stuff, and to be able to think dually about the textuality and the materiality in order to access the history, which is really the ultimate aim. So I'll just finish off. Whoops, what's big on, is it? Yeah, with a few words of thanks to everyone who's involved in making all of this happen, both in Iraq and at UCL and at various points around the world. So thank you very much. Shall I disconnect?
Yeah, I will just turn off the broadcast.
Yeah.
For this part, because you won't be able to pick up everyone's questions anyway.
Fine, we've got so many screens open now. Okay, goodbye world.